In a quiet town near New Orleans, life was simple but harsh. The streets were narrow, lined with old wooden houses that creaked under the weight of years. People went about their daily routines, merchants calling out the prices of vegetables, children running barefoot in the dust, church bells echoing in the distance. Yet among this ordinary rhythm of life, there was one figure that stood apart, a figure everyone noticed but few truly cared about. At the edge of the marketplace sat a blind hermit. For as long as anyone could remember, he had been there through scorching summers, endless rains, and bitter cold nights. His clothes were tattered, his beard long and unkempt, and his eyes clouded and lifeless. Yet there was something unforgettable about him. Whenever he spoke, his voice carried a strange pull. It wasn't loud or commanding, but soft and filled with an unusual depth, as though it carried secrets of the heart. Many stories swirled around this old man. Some whispered that he had once been a wealthy merchant who lost everything. Others claimed he had served the governor before being betrayed. A few simply dismissed him as mad, inventing tales to hide his misery. The hermit never argued, never explained. He would sit quietly, sometimes smiling faintly, as if he knew truths too heavy for others to understand. In the same town lived a boy named David. His life was far from easy. He and his mother lived in a fragile hut at the edge of the town. His father had died when he was just a child, and his mother, Mrs. Grace, was bedridden with illness. Day and night, she lay weak on her cot, whispering prayers for her son. David was the only support she had left. Each morning, he set out in search of work carrying bricks at construction sites, cleaning shops, or helping merchants at the docks. Whatever little money he earned, he spent on food and medicine for his mother. Often, there wasn't enough for himself. On days when he couldn't find work, he would return home empty-handed, hiding his hunger so his mother wouldn't worry. One day, after several nights without food, David wandered the streets weak and exhausted. His steps dragged, his body ached, and his stomach burned with hunger. As he passed through the marketplace, the blind hermit stirred, lifting his head slightly. Though he could not see, he somehow sensed the boy's condition. "Oh boy, stop." The voice was soft, yet powerful, filled with compassion. David froze, startled. Slowly, he turned, and without knowing why, walked toward the old man. "Sit by me," the hermit said gently. "I have nothing," David whispered, ashamed. The old man smiled faintly. "I am not asking from you. I am giving you something." From within his ragged clothing, the hermit pulled out a piece of dry bread and offered it to the boy. David stared in shock. How could a man who begged all day have food to share? And how had he known the boy was starving? David took the bread with trembling hands. As he ate, his eyes filled with tears. It was the simplest meal he had ever tasted. Yet in that moment, it felt like a gift greater than gold. David sat silently beside the hermit, still chewing the last crumbs of bread. Around them, the town bustled, carts rattled over the cobblestones. Vendors shouted their prices, and children laughed in the distance. Yet for David, it all faded away. He felt as if he had stepped into a different world, one where only he and this old man existed. At last, curiosity overcame him. "Sir," he asked softly, "you cannot see, yet you knew I was starving. How?" The hermit turned his clouded eyes toward him. Though blind, his gaze carried an intensity that made David shiver. "Son," he replied, "I have sat in these streets for 30 years. I have listened to thousands of footsteps. Yours told me everything. They were heavy with sorrow, weak with hunger, but steady with purpose. I have never heard such footsteps before." David lowered his head, ashamed that his suffering was so icily revealed. But the hermit's tone was not mocking. It was gentle, almost proud. "For years," the old man continued, "I have waited. I knew one day someone would pass who was not driven by greed or deceit, but by love and sacrifice. That someone, my boy, is you." David blinked, startled. "Me? But I'm nobody. I have nothing but a sick mother and a broken home. Why would you wait for me?" The hermit's lips curved into a faint smile. "Because treasure belongs not to the powerful, but to the worthy. And I have carried a secret too heavy for one man alone. It is time to share it with the one who can bear it. Before David could speak, the old man rose slowly, leaning on his staff. His voice dropped to a whisper. Come with me. There is something I must show you. But remember, this is not a gift. It is a test. If your heart is strong, you will succeed. If not, the journey will break you. David hesitated. His mother needed him, and his body cried out for rest. Yet deep inside, something stirred. Perhaps it was hope, or destiny, or simply the desperate belief that his life could be more than endless hunger. He followed. The hermit led him through narrow streets, past silent houses where windows were broken and doors hung loose. Dust clung to every wall, and the air smelled of decay. Finally, they stopped at a crumbling wall in a forgotten alley. The old man tapped the ground with his staff in a strange rhythm, then pried loose a brick. From the hollow beneath, he pulled out a small metal chest, its surface rusted and coated with dust. David's eyes widened. What is that? The hermit opened it carefully. Inside was a folded parchment, yellowed with age, its lines faded but still visible. This, the hermit whispered, his voice trembling, is a map. The map to a treasure I have guarded all my life. And now, it is yours. David stared at the fragile parchment, his heart racing. The map looked ancient, its edges torn, its ink faded into ghostly lines. Yet it was clear enough to show paths, marks, and strange symbols. His hands shook as he held it, as though he carried something far heavier than paper. This is real, he whispered. A treasure map. The hermit nodded. His blind eyes turned toward David, as if he could see the wonder in the boy's face. Yes, my son. It is the secret I have guarded for half a century. And it is not simply treasure it, it's a trust. David's breath caught. The word treasure sounded like a dream, something distant from his life of hunger and poverty. But a second thought troubled him. Why didn't you tell anyone? Why wait all these years? A shadow crossed the hermit's face. His voice grew quiet, heavy with memory. Because when I once spoke of it, people mocked me. They laughed at the blind beggar who dreamed of riches. How can a man without sight lead anyone to treasure? They said. Some called me a liar, others a madman. Not one believed. But I knew the truth, and I swore I would keep it safe until the right soul appeared. Not one ruled by greed or deceit, but one who understood sacrifice. He placed his hand on David's shoulder, firm despite his frailty. And that is you. I have heard it in your footsteps, felt it in your silence. You carry hunger, yes, but also loyalty. You endure pain for the sake of love. That makes you worthy. David's chest tightened. He shook his head in disbelief. But I'm no hero. I'm just a boy struggling to feed his mother. How could I ever bear such a responsibility? The hermit's faint smile returned. Because true treasure is never given to heroes, it is given to those who need it most and who will use it with honor for the first time. David felt as if his life was being pulled by something larger than himself. The map in his hands seemed to glow with possibility. He saw not just coins or jewels, but a chance, maybe even hope for his mother, for a life beyond misery. That night, he could hardly sleep. He hid the map under his pillow, staring into the dark, while the hermit's words echoed in his mind. Now you are my eyes, and I am your guide. By dawn, his decision was made. He left food for his mother, asked a neighbor to watch over her, and returned to the alley. The hermit was already waiting, a faint smile on his lips. From today, the old man said firmly, we are no longer beggar and boy. We are travelers. Travelers who may lose their way, but who will find the truth. The morning sun rose slowly over the horizon, washing the town in shades of gold and amber. The air was cool, carrying with it the distant toll of church bells and the faint murmur of people beginning their day. But David felt detached from it all. With the fragile map tucked safely in his satchel, he knew he was stepping out of one life and into another. Beside him, the hermit walked with steady patience, leaning on his wooden staff. His eyes were clouded, yet his steps were purposeful, as though some unseen guide led him forward. David kept glancing at him, wondering how a man without sight could walk so confidently into the unknown. Finally, curiosity overcame him. Sir, he asked, how can you trust me so easily? You've known me for only a day. What if I betray you?" The old man's lips curved into a small smile. "Because betrayal announces itself, son. It walks with sharp, hurried steps. Greed shuffles restlessly, and lies stumble under their own weight. But your footsteps carried hunger, not deceit, pain, not pride. And I trust the sound of a man's heart more than the sight of his face." David said nothing, but inside he felt a warmth he hadn't known in years. All his life, people had seen him as weak, poor, desperate. Yet this blind hermit had found worth in him. The path ahead stretched long, winding toward the banks of a wide river. According to the map, the treasure lay far beyond days of travel through forests, ruins, and forgotten lands. David's body was tired, but his spirit felt strangely alive, driven by a fire he couldn't quite explain. That evening, they stopped at the remains of an abandoned farmhouse. Its roof sagged, its walls cracked, and weeds had overtaken the floor. David gathered wood and built a fire, its light flickering against the broken walls. As they sat, David finally asked, "Sir, were you never afraid, carrying such a secret alone all these years?" The hermit tilted his head toward the flames. "Fear belongs to those whose hearts are restless. I carried the truth, yes, but I did not deceive. Whatever trials came, I accepted them. My body was broken, but my spirit endured. Now I live for only one purpose: to see this treasure reach the hands of the one who deserves it." David lowered his gaze, tears stinging his eyes. For the first time, he felt chosen, not by luck, but by something greater. The night grew deeper, and from the distance came the howls of wild animals. David shivered, but the hermit sat calm and steady. "Remember this, son," he said softly. "Every night ends with dawn, and every hardship hides a light waiting to be found." As the fire crackled, David closed his eyes. Sleep came slowly, but in his dreams he no longer saw hunger. He saw the road ahead, and the promise of something greater. The long days passed, as David and the hermit journeyed farther from the town. The road grew lonelier, winding through patches of forest and stretches of barren land, where even the birds seemed silent. The sound of the river guided them forward, its wide current glistening in the distance like a silver ribbon. By evening, they reached a place marked on the fragile parchment, the ruins of an old inn. Once, it must have welcomed travelers and merchants, but now it stood broken and hollow, as though abandoned by time itself. Its roof sagged dangerously, beams cracked with age. The windows were empty holes, staring like the eyes of a ghost. Vines crept along the walls, swallowing what little remained of its once proud structure. David held up the map, his hands trembling. "Sir," he whispered, his voice thick with awe, "this is the place. The mark is here." The hermit tilted his head slightly, as though listening to the wind. A faint smile touched his lips. "Yes," he murmured. "Years ago, I came here with my father. This was the last time I felt the breath of the treasure. Beyond these walls lies the truth we seek." David pushed the crooked door open. The hinges groaned loudly, the sound echoing through the hollow structure. Inside, silence reigned. Dust lay thick on the floor, disturbed only by animal tracks. Cobwebs hung from the rafters, swaying gently in the evening air. Raising his lantern, David searched the walls. His eyes caught a strange inscription, carved faintly into the stone, where the wall breathes. "There the earth speaks." A chill ran down his spine. "Sir, there are words here," he called softly. The hermit tapped across the floor until he reached him. With his rough hands, he traced the carving, whispering the words as if reciting an old prayer. Then he began tapping the wall with his staff. Most bricks sounded heavy and solid, but one gave a hollow echo. The hermit lifted his head. "Here, this is the place." Together, they pried the brick loose. A cloud of dust rose, and behind it yawned a dark opening. A cold gust of air swept out, carrying the scent of earth untouched for decades. David leaned forward, his lantern casting light into the hole. A narrow tunnel descended into the ground, its walls swallowed in shadow. His heartbeat quickened. "Do we go in now?" The hermit shook his head firmly. "No, child. The night is not our ally. we rest here. At dawn, with renewed strength, we descend, relieved yet uneasy. David gathered wood and built a small fire near the tunnel's mouth. They sat in silence, the flames flickering, while the dark opening gaped beside them like the mouth of some ancient beast. That night, David barely slept. Every crack of wood, every sigh of wind felt like a warning. He clutched the map tightly to his chest, knowing that tomorrow, the earth itself would test his courage. The night was restless. David lay near the fire, clutching the map against his chest. The ruined inn around them groaned under the weight of the wind. Every crack, every rustle of leaves felt like footsteps in the dark. Sleep teased his eyes, but fear kept dragging him awake. Then it came a faint sound, soft but sharp enough to cut through the silence. It was the sound of a door creaking somewhere in the ruined structure. David's eyes flew open. His instincts told him they weren't alone. Grabbing his lantern, he rose quietly and stepped outside. The night air was heavy, and shadows stretched endlessly across the ground. He thought he saw movement near the broken wall, something shifting in the darkness. His pulse quickened. Before he could investigate further, a shadowy figure stepped into the firelight. A tall man, his face half hidden by the hood of his cloak, stood glaring at them. His voice was harsh, filled with arrogance. "Hand over the treasure map," he demanded, "or both of you will die here tonight." David froze. The hermit, however, did not flinch. He tilted his head, listening carefully to the man's footsteps on the floorboards. "So it is you," the old man said calmly. "I have heard your steps before. You have been following me for days." The intruder sneered. "No one in this town believed you, old fool. But I did. I knew your silence hid something valuable. You think a beggar's secret could stay hidden forever? Not tonight. It ends with me." David's heart pounded. His hands shook, but anger pushed through his fear. "You won't take it," he said firmly. The man laughed darkly. "And who are you to stop me? A starving boy with nothing. Move aside." In a flash, the intruder drew a short sword and lunged. David barely dodged, his instincts sharpened by desperation. He grabbed a piece of broken wood from the floor and parried the attack. The clash echoed in the silent inn. The hermit raised his voice, steady and commanding. "David, remember, courage is stronger than steel." Fueled by the words, David pushed back fiercely. He twisted, catching the man's wrist and knocking the sword free. With all his strength, he shoved him to the ground. The intruder stumbled, eyes wide with shock, then scrambled to his feet. Realizing he had lost, he fled into the night, vanishing into the shadows from which he came. Breathing heavily, David stood trembling, the broken wood still in his hands. The hermit's face lifted toward him, a proud smile breaking across his weathered features. "Well done, son," he said softly. "The enemy will not return. You have proven yourself braver than I imagined." David's chest heaved, but for the first time, he felt the fire of courage burning inside him. He had not only defended the hermit, he had defended the treasure's secret, and in doing so, he had defended his own destiny. The night passed slowly, but dawn finally arrived, washing the ruins of the inn with pale morning light. David felt both exhausted and restless. The memory of the intruder's attack still clung to him, but the hermit's calm voice reminded him that their journey wasn't over. With their lanterns lit and the map close at hand, they turned toward the dark tunnel hidden behind the wall. The entrance yawned before them, narrow and cold, like the throat of some ancient beast. David hesitated, his breath quick and shallow. "Are you ready, son?" the hermit asked quietly. David swallowed hard, then nodded. "Yes, let's finish this." They stepped inside. The air was damp, thick with the smell of earth that had lain untouched for decades. The tunnel sloped downward, its walls pressing close around them. Each step echoed like a drumbeat in David's ears. He held the lantern high, its glow revealing roots twisting through the soil, stones crumbling underfoot, and symbols carved faintly into the walls. The deeper they went, the heavier the silence became. Finally, they reached a massive wooden door bound with iron. Rust covered its surface, and a heavy lock sealed it shut. The hermit reached into his pouch and placed something in David's hand. It was a small iron key, worn smooth by time. His voice trembled as he spoke. "I have guarded this key for 50 years. Today, it fulfills its purpose." David's hands shook as he slid the key into the lock. With a groan, the mechanism turned and the door creaked open. Beyond lay a chamber, bathed in darkness, but in the center glimmered a faint light. They stepped inside. The room was vast but bare, its stone walls unadorned. In the middle stood a large chest, old but intact, its metal fittings gleaming faintly in the lantern's glow. David's heartbeat thundered. He approached slowly, each step heavier than the last. At last, he knelt and lifted the lid. The creak of the hinges echoed like thunder in the silent chamber. Inside, treasures sparkled, gold coins piled high, jewels glowing with deep colors, and ancient scrolls inscribed with fading ink. David gasped, his eyes wide with disbelief. Yet among the riches lay something far more striking, a small ring wrapped in cloth, engraved with the seal of a governor from long ago. David held it up to the light. "Sir, there's a ring here, with a seal." The hermit's face softened into a smile. "Yes, that seal once belonged to my father, who was entrusted with safeguarding the governor's greatest possessions. This ring is proof of his honor, and now of yours." Tears welled in David's eyes. For the first time, he realized the treasure was not only wealth, it was legacy. It was the weight of trust passed down through generations. The hermit placed a hand on David's shoulder. "We have found the treasure, but remember, son, the greatest treasure is not what lies in this chest. It is what lies within us." David stood silently, gazing at the treasure chest. Gold and jewels sparkled under the lantern's glow, but his eyes kept drifting back to the simple ring with the governor's seal. It seemed to shine brighter than the coins, as if whispering that true worth lay not in wealth, but in the honor it represented. The hermit's hand trembled as he placed it gently over the chest. "Son, my journey ends here. I have carried this secret in my heart for decades. I lost my family, my health, and even my sight to protect it. But now, the burden is lifted. The treasure has found its keeper." David's throat tightened. "No, sir," he said quickly, his voice breaking. "Stay with me. Don't call it the end. Come home with me. I'll take care of you as if you were my own father." For the first time, the hermit's smile carried warmth, not mystery. "If God allows, I will. But remember, David, my share of this treasure belongs to the poor. Promise me you will use it not just for yourself, but for others." David nodded firmly, tears in his eyes. "I promise." They lifted the chest together and began their journey back. The road felt different now, not empty and heavy, but alive with hope. The hermit leaned on David's arm, and though his body was frail, his spirit seemed lighter than it had in years. When they returned to the small hut, David's mother wept with joy. Her son, once beaten down by poverty, now stood before her with light in his eyes. They told her the story, and though she could hardly believe it, she thanked God for delivering them from despair. David wasted no time. He used the treasure to build a proper house where his mother could finally rest in comfort. Doctors were brought to treat her illness, and for the first time in years, her strength slowly began to return. But David did not forget his promise. A large portion of the gold was given to the poor families who had suffered as he once did, widows and orphans who had nothing. The townspeople, who once ignored the blind hermit and dismissed David as just another starving boy, now looked upon them with awe and respect. The hermit, no longer alone, lived in David's home, treated with kindness and honor. For the rest of his days, he prayed in peace, knowing that his burden had turned into a blessing for another. True treasure is not measured in gold or jewels, but in character. It belongs to those who are honest, who endure hardship with patience, and who think of others before themselves. David's life proved this. He began as a hungry boy struggling for survival, but through loyalty, sacrifice, and courage, he became the heir to something far greater than wealth, a legacy of truth and compassion. When a person holds on to goodness, even in the darkest nights of life, time will eventually guide them toward the light. Friends, I hope you felt the power of this story. If it touched your heart, don't forget, smash that like button, Comment respect if you believe true wealth is kindness. And hit subscribe because every day will bring you more powerful stories that remind us what truly matters. Until next time, goodbye and God bless.